on to close.
Sure. So before I start the session, any questions on the previous sessions? Anyone tried going and doing some stuff? All right, no questions. Okay, so I'll start today. So today's session will be on framework, and the next session will be on the CI/CD pipelines for Robot Framework. But today's session will basically focus on uh, some of the key components of the framework and how you can integrate those components together to make uh, a wholesome framework which is easier to maintain and uh, easier to ramp up as well, right? So I'll share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see my screen. I'll increase the font size as well. All right. So I have this small framework that how robot framework generally is structured and where you can find most of the details in terms of how do you maintain robot framework and what are the key components that you need to use and what are some of the uh, m- major considerations that we need to do when we create a framework, right? So the first part is we needed an app just to test if whatever we are doing is working or
Can you
not.
make the font little bigger? Sorry.
Yeah, I already made the font bigger, uh, but this folder structure I'm not able to make it bigger, right? This is
Oh,
something I cannot do
okay.
that,
Got it. Got it.
right? So if you look the font here and the font here, they're all big, but this is somehow I'm not able to. All right, so I created this small server where what basically we're doing is this is a simple Python file to with the UI so that we can just start the server to do some of our validations. What I will do is I'll just run the command Python and run server.py. So what it will do is it will start the demo server on port 7272. So if I go here and I refresh, so this is what it will look like. So if I go and enter my username password, it will do a login, give me a success message or invalid message, depending on if I'm putting the right username password. Um, if I'm doing it wrong, then it will serve error HTML, which is this. If I'm doing right, it will serve me a welcome HTML, right? And it will give me a logout link as well. All right, this is my server. Uh, so this is generally just for our practice purposes. This is nothing to do with Robot Framework. So let's move on to the Robot Framework, where the first thing that I do or we should be doing is creating a document folder where we are putting all our documentation that we do for Robot Framework. You can either write it in HTML or a markup language, depending on what you're comfortable with. You can also add your text files or uh, your README files here, depending on what mode you select for your documentation. A good part about documentation is that you can create your own UI like we did in our previous class for Selenium based. We created our own UI. You can create the same uh, UI for robot framework as well. So the idea is still the same, where you can have a live documentation where you can just execute from the document itself. So in order to spread uh, your test across user base and not just testers, you can use that live documentation and ask anyone else to run through those tests. And all those tests will be executed either on the CI/CD pipeline or on a separate Selenium grid server, depending on if you're using Selenium with Robot Framework. You can also use APIs with Robot Framework. You can also use Appium with Robot Framework. It's basically your choice of framework that you want to select. But the components, irrespective of what library you use, the components of the framework still remain the same, right? Next, we move to Python library. So here I've created a simple function where it's basically doing a login. Uh, so, uh, so I'm using this external function uh, as our Python library function uh, to use it in our framework. So any kind of library that you're going to put in, or any kind of functions you're going to put in, you can create a Python library structure where you're putting all your Python libraries that you're custom creating for your own organization or for your own testing needs. So what it is doing is it's opening this text file, it's reading that text file, and then getting the username and password out of those text files. Uh, these text files are coming from the test data folder. So this function is integrated with the test data folder. So all your test data can get stored here. So if I look at the user details here, this is my username and password uh, that I'm fetching, uh, which basically uh, it's a very raw implementation where basically I'm doing is I'm splitting based on this delimiter and then fetching the username and password. And then I'm using the WebDriver class. Uh, and then I'm going into the Chrome browser and I'm inputting that username password and I'm doing a click. And that's what my verified login is doing. So anything that you are doing in the robot framework, which doesn't have an inbuilt keyword, like Selenium doesn't have this keyword verify login is not there in Selenium library. So the reason that I have to create this is that I want a custom function that anyone can use. So this is my keyword now. So whenever I do verify login as a keyword, it will run this function. And then it will use the driver class and not the robot framework Selenium class. And then I will have a result folder where I will have the reports and the logs listed out. So I will have the HTML report. I will so if I open this with Chrome, it should look like this. Login, and this is what it did, and all the details associated with it. Uh, so if I have a structure for results where all my results are getting stored, I need to define that as well. The one thing that I need here that I've not put here is a config file, uh, where what we have seen in our previous uh, where is it out of test? Here. So you can have this config files where you are storing your keywords and your variables. It's pretty straightforward where this configuration makes a lot of sense. I can copy this configuration there. In my framework, first thing structure wise, I need a config. I can create a new folder here. Config, very important. and then I can just copy paste these files so that it becomes more clear. So I have two files in the config. One is this, and one is this. So I can use any of these variables inside any of my robot framework files, but it has only one place for maintenance. So it makes my life much more easier. From the keyword standpoint, I'll do the same. I'll define all my keywords here. I can define my keywords here as well. Uh, I can define some of the keywords in the Python library, but I can link this keyword with global keyword library so that it becomes much more easier for me to have all the keywords in one place, irrespective of what Python library I'm writing in. The only thing is that I have to import that library here as well, like the one we imported here, where we uh, imported multiple libraries in. So if you look here, there are two libraries that have been imported. This is how you will import a Python file, which will give me a keyword based on whatever I've mentioned in the library. So this is get time now. So this becomes as a keyword here in my function, but I could have put the keyword here as well. Uh, and all my keywords will be stored in one place. So that will make my life much more easier in terms of maintenance of those keywords. And the only thing is that I have to import another library of that Python file. Uh, so when I'm going to look for the keywords, I have only one file where I'm looking for all my keywords. So if you go here after the results, we have test cases. This is basically something that you can define based on the discussions with your team. But generally, you will have something like a Gherkin structure of test case where you can use the BDD framework where given when then is used. So you can use this approach for writing test cases. Uh, this is basically your BDD structure. So basically you're telling other users who are not familiar with the code of robot framework to write your use cases in plain English language in this format, which is given when then, or you can use this to import any of your existing BDD framework use cases into robot framework. So it helps into approach. You don't have to change the way you're writing your test. So if you're already following a BDD approach, this makes more sense. But if you're not following BDD approach, this becomes a little complex because it adds an additional layer of complexity or abstraction on top of your code, which is already keyword driven approach. So pretty much good enough to read in terms of plain English language and good enough to create a user workflow. Uh, and this is something not independent of your robot file. So what I mean by this is that you still need to write your resources, tear down methods, keywords, and everything in the same file. The ideal scenario, you would have a separate BDD file, like a feature file, where you don't have all those codes integrated inside your feature file. That is taken care by your global teardown and setups, as well as uh, uh, your code file that is attached with that feature file, right? So it becomes much more easier to send the feature file to another user and get the response back. But in this case, it becomes a little trickier because then you have to send another file and not this file for them to write BDD feature. So the other person has to be trained in writing Gherkin format files. In the feature file, you already have samples listed out and examples listed out in the same way, and you have to just follow that pattern. So this is a valid case in terms of if you already are following a BDD framework and you just want to migrate from that BDD framework to this BDD framework. And then you can follow the data-driven approach, which is this. Basically, you are writing a test case, you're logging in, and you're only providing your use case in terms of your details, where you're passing username, password, you're passing invalid, valid, invalid, whatever, an empty username, empty password. So this way, it's much more simpler in terms of identifying. So you're following the same login process. Uh, so there are uh, two keywords that have been defined, which is login with invalid credentials should fail, login should have failed, right? Uh, Based on this, I'm using a test template, login with invalid credentials should fail. This one, I'm already using it inside this uh, keyword, right? So this is nothing but a keyword that I'm going to use inside this keyword. So this becomes basically a nested keyword, but I'm defining it as a template, which is a test template. And then I'm defining my data-driven approach saying my first scenario is first test case is invalid username. And I'm using, so what test template means is I have the first line of a test case. The test case is invalid username. This is basically the name of the test, nothing else. And then what it will do is the first thing it will do is it will run this, right, with these parameters, right? So if you look here, the arguments, so if I'm running this template, I need to have username and password as an argument. If I'm going here, I'm and entering invalid username, but a valid password, it should not allow me to log in. It should fail. So all these test cases should fail. If any of these one we are able to log in, then it's a fail from the test perspective, right? From the functionality perspective, right? So if you go here, all these are failure cases, negative cases, invalid username and password. You're putting invalid and whatever as a password. You're putting an empty and a valid password. So you're keeping your username empty. So all these are different scenarios, but following the same workflow, right? It's basically doing inputting username and inputting password, and then submitting those credentials, and then you should have error URL listed out or title should be error page, right? So that's the whole workflow of invalid credentials. And then you can integrate your resource.robot where you are just entering all these things, not from the global standpoint perspective, but from a single test folder perspective, right? So this is how you will structure it. So right now I've just written test cases, but you can have let's say you have a product having, let's say you have an application with 5 product listings inside that app, right? So you can have, let's say so I'm creating 5 folders, so each one for a single product. So this resource file is limited to that folder itself, right? That product itself, and it's not available globally. Global is something that all the 5 products are using, right? So like, let's say all the 5 products go through the same login process or through the same dashboard, right? So in order to reach that dashboard, you still have to follow the global process of logging in, right? It's not dependent on product. It's depending on your app, right? It's an app login. It's not a product login. Similar way, there are multiple scenarios where you have uh, global parameters or global functions that you can define, and then you can have specific to that particular product as well. So you can define your resources or your keyword files based on individual product as well. And then there are different ways on how you can write tests. You can write uh, a detailed list of tests as well, where you're doing a login and then opening browser, inputting text. This is much more readable and friendly in terms of what steps are being followed. So if you go to the previous test, we were not clear on looking at the test. Uh, we were not clear on what path it is following. I know what it is doing, right? From the scenario perspective, I know it is testing invalid username. It's testing invalid password, but it's not giving me step by step workflow of what it is doing until unless I go below and look at the keywords, right? Here, I am making it much more simpler. I'm not writing it this one as a separate keyword. The whole point is that you can look at it stepwise. Uh, the con of this approach is that they're not very reusable, right? So if you are not attaching your workflow with keywords, uh, they're okay if you are just doing it once. But if you're doing login again and again, it's better to do it via reusable approach. This approach is not very usable and not very friendly in terms of, but if you're doing a one-off testing and you don't want anything to be impacted globally in your framework, you use this approach, right? If you're doing any POC on a new product or a new functionality, use this approach. Once this approach is there. So this is how you write test in Robot Framework, right? So you start writing like this. So this is the first step of how you will write, right? And now you know these are the variables. Now you will define which of these variables will go in the global library, which of these variables will go in the test resource library, right? Or your product library. And then once you have this test case, and then you define what keyword I can you create out of these steps. So it makes more sense to anyone who is looking at the test, right? So for me, opening a browser, inputting text, and inputting another text, and then closing the browser uh, is a kind of a valid login. I'm not clicking on anything here, so it's basically if I use click as well and I'm going into login, I verify that login as well, like I did in the invalid test. I will create it as a keyword and I'll put it as in the global variable library. So the first step is you create this type of test, right? And then identify which one will go where, right? And once you have that, then you can have a reusably component. You cannot directly go into the reusably component unless you really define what you want, right? uh, until unless that happens, this happens, uh, you you would have much more ease in defining where everything will go, or these are already available in the global library, right? The other part is some of these things, some variables or functionality might already exist in your global library or your product library. So first step, uh, write this, right? Valid login, and what you will do, right? Uh, Open browser input text, and submitting on click, and you then go to the keyword library, either global or the product keyword library, and see if something similar exists, right? Uh, you can start from there, but I would recommend don't put too many details in here at the first pass. Just give it as a go that these are the variables that you need, and these are the action items that you want to do, and then go and look in the library. If it's not there, then think about where you're gonna put them. Any questions till now?
So Sumit, after inputting password, there is some action required, right? So is it missing or we need
Yeah,
to
yeah.
go? Okay.
So the action required is clicking on submit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so if I go here, so this is what is missing. So if I go to submit credentials, this is a global keyword uh, where not global, the product resources, where it defines what submit credential means, which means click button. I can directly go here in test.robot and just input that, right? I can expand it further, right? After clicking button, what will happen? I should see a new page, right? So if I go back to the invalid test, I should, I can say that the title should be right?
Mhm.
This way I can define my functionality workflow, right? Which is pretty straightforward, but I need to see if this function already exists in global or product uh, library. If not, then can I can I use this to create a keyword and just put it in the resource library? So I can just create a keyword, right? So I can just say keywords. I can just remove all this and replace it with login method, right? Now this is the function keyword that I used. I can use this keyword in the resources library also, right? And then anyone using uh, this folder or creating anything in this has access to this. If I just keep it in this robot framework in the test.robot, then no other file in this product folder will be able to use this keyword, right? So I can just remove this. I don't need the keywords here. I can just do log invalid, right? So I'm making it reusable. Any file that is in the product library uh, can use this keyword or function in any of the file that they're going to use in that product. So the idea is that the first thing that we need to do is we need to define the resource library that we have. So if I go here, I will define resource.robot. So anything that is under resource.robot, I can use, right? And in the resource.robot, there can be multiple resource.robot. This is the product level, so there is no path to it, but I can also import resource. Uh, if I just want to uh, keep one file straightforward, what I can do is I can go to resource here and and just put a resource library here, which is basically this, let's say keyword.robot config library, and I can import this. So inherently, it will import, uh, it will import, once I import uh, this library, it will import this library also because this library is already importing this file, right? So this way you can make a linking structure, which is very important because for any robot framework to work seamlessly, you need to create a linking structure and you need to make sure what are the global files that you need to import. You want to keep it simple, just create a global file. And if you know that there are other files, resource files that are going to be imported as well, put that in a single file. So whenever you are creating a product test or any robot file, you are importing just one file, which is a resource file. And inside the resource file, you are already importing multiple resource files, right? So in that way, you can structure your robot framework, but it's up to you basically how you want to structure it. Uh, the ideal way is you create a linking so that it becomes easier for any new person to come and work on it. And then you have a structure with test data where you are storing all your test data. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You can do it via text, you can do it via CSV, or you can do it via a custom test data library with Python that you can use and write it in a tabular format. Or you can also integrate this data with your test data with your database. So you can store all your test data needs in the database, and you can just create keywords here in the test data where they're calling those particular data sets, right? And all you need to do is you need to uh, write in the documentation on what kind of data is being returned, right? And in what format it is getting returned. You can also use custom Python libraries to import that data. You can use NumPy, you can use pandas to import those data structures in a data frame, and then uh, massage that data, process that data, and put it in whatever format you want. Another good part of database is that whatever outputs you're getting, and if you want that those outputs that needs to be stored so that you can use this in the next run, you can do that via database as well. You can also do it in the file, but then what will happen is if you do it in a single file, it will remain on that server, right? So if you run it next, let's say you're running in a CI/CD pipeline, it will save that file in a particular workspace, or if you change the code, it can save it in a particular location on the CI/CD server, but then CI/CD server doesn't rely on one agent, right? So you can have a master and a slave. Uh, so it can whatever workspace it is running, uh, then it becomes difficult to access those files. Otherwise, you have to write a lot of custom code in order to just keep it at one server, right? If that's not what is required, there are other ways you can store that data in AWS storage S3 bucket. You can use Azure storage space, but the ideal is that you store it in a database so that it becomes much more simpler uh, to look at and navigate, right? And to just find that using any query. Otherwise, you have to call a custom function, use NumPy or pandas to pick that file up, put it in a data frame, and get into the required format, and then you use that data. Right. So let's run one test and see if. So we'll run the valid login. Yeah. So it passed. These are the results. So valid login is this. Basically, I'm inputting opening browser to login page, inputting username, password, submit credentials. Welcome page should be open. Right. So if I go to individual keywords, I should be able to find those uh, keywords if they're mentioned here. So welcome page should be open. So what it says is location should be welcome URL, title should be welcome page. These are all Selenium Robot Framework keywords. This is the custom framework keyword that I've created. Any questions till now? Any question on the framework component or on the reporting or on anything that you guys feel is missing out of this framework that you should have that you guys already see in your current setup?
So welcome page should be open is the assertion we made.
Yeah, this is the assertion that we made. So welcome page should be open if I go to that particular keyboard. So if I go to this particular keyword, what it is doing is it's checking that the location should be this uh, variable and the title should be welcome page. Right. So these are the two assertions that I'm doing under this. So if I go to welcome URL, okay. So this is the welcome URL, which is basically HTTP server slash welcome.html. So if you look at the demo app, if I go to HTML, so this is the welcome page, which is welcome.html. So I'm looking for this page when I'm doing valid login. So the server is basically this. Yeah. So if you look here, localhost, this is the server, and then hyphen welcome.html. I'm validating this, as well as I'm validating. So this is the URL I'm validating. So this is the URL I'm validating, which is correct. And then the second thing that I was validating is title should be welcome page. So if you look at the title, this is the title, which is welcome page. So these are the two validations or assertions I'm doing. Any questions?
And for reporting purpose, where can we find the reports, like what are test
So
pass and failed
so if you look at the result folder, this is where
results?
all the reports will be listed out. If you want to go to report and look at the pass or failure, you open it in a Chrome browser. You look at this, you see all test. And this is the test that we ran, which is test valid login. And then this comes into the log file. So you can switch from here. So if you look here, there is a report. So I can directly go to report. I can go directly to log from here. So if I go here, this is the valid login that I did. And then these are the three things that I performed in that valid login and the pass. If there is a fail, it will throw this error, stack error, showing what failed. So this is okay. Let me increase this one. So this is the log file where open browser to login page, input user, input password, submit credentials, welcome page should be open, and close library. So if you look here, it will tell you. So this keyword is in the resource library. This is in the resource library. This is in the resource library. And this close browser is the keyword from Selenium library. Right? So it makes your life easier. If something fails from this, then you will exactly know where to look for. If it in a resource library, if it is in a different resource library, or if it is in a Selenium library. So it will give you the library name from which that keyword is derived. And then you can exactly go to that library, look that for that keyword and see if the failure is expected or not. So if I go to welcome page should be open, then if you look here, right, welcome page should be open. It's in the resource library. And then I'm using two more keywords, which is associated with Selenium library, right, inside the keywords. So these two are location should be welcome URL. It should be, it's this, and it will give you the info as well that current location is localhost 7272 and welcome.html. Title should be welcome page. Page title is welcome page, right? So it will give you detailed information. If something fails, it will give you detailed information of why that failed. So if I let me change it to something that will cause a failure, right? So if I go to here, valid login,
So
welcome.
you could run the invalid login test case also.
Yep.
Thanks.
Let me just cause this to fail first. Uh,
Okay.
so welcome. So I will not write welcome.html. I'll say well.html, right? And this should fail now. And then we can see at the failure result. So it failed. Now let's look at the failed result. Okay, not very good color. So I'll go directly. So this is showing me in the report that this failed. Location should have been this, but was welcome.html, right? So what I this is my expected, which is well.html, and this is what I'm getting, which is welcome.html. Right? So it gives you good enough detail on what it failed. And it will also capture the screenshot of that particular page on where it failed. So once it failed, verifies the current URL is this, it takes a snapshot and then it tells me that location should have been this, but uh, we are getting welcome.html. So the invalid login is nothing but this, where it will, as I talked about in the previous session, uh, that you have a template. So and then you have the other details that you're running. And somehow it's not allowing me to fix this error. Let's try running it. The meaningful error message. It's working. Yep. So somehow this error message is not meaningful. I'm not sure why. PyCharm is doing that, but this is how all the tests ran. So invalid username, we got pass, invalid password, we got pass, invalid username password, empty username, empty password. So if you look at the reports, report, so we ran 6 tests. So if I go to all test, so empty password, empty username and password, invalid username, invalid username and password, all failed, which means that, uh, which is what we expected. So the status is pass. And this is how the log files will look like. Uh, so this is the suite invalid login, and these are the tests under that particular suite. So if I go here, so this is the suite that we have, and then which is invalid login, and then we have invalid username, invalid password. Let's do a correct uh, one, right? And let's see if this one fails. Instead of giving invalid, I'm giving valid. So one fail, which is 5 pass and 1 fail. If I open the report again, now it should show me that 6 total tests, 5 pass, 1 fail. I go to log file, I see what the fail. And then instead of having the URL error, I'm getting a welcome. Right? So it runs as 6 tests, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then this is the template that it is running with these details. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions on this? Anything you guys can think that you looked at some framework previously or in your organization or during the sessions, some part that is missing that is not there in the Robert framework?
So, so reporting is the default one, right? So can we do it customized?
Yes. So there are 2 ways you can do it, right? So one is you create a custom logger for yourself. So if I go to, let me open this. Where it open? So this is the custom logger that I've created. So it creates a log file and it stores that file in this detailed log. And I define what kind of logging will go into it. So error log, this is the current frame file name. It will split and then it will do the logging. And then I'm using the built-in robot library functionality as well. So I'm basically telling that what kind of logging I want to do, and if I want to create a log file for myself, and what kind of information goes into the log file. Another way is this is the implementation of that. So I implement this in a Python library, which this is how my custom, once I've written all this code, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing a log message. Where I'm using the logger and then creating a log file and logging message and error log, right? So this is a custom implementation of logging that you can do. This is not as straightforward, but from most of the request comes from the logging perspective rather than the reporting perspective, because reporting is pretty straightforward, right? The other thing that you can do is with reporting is that you can store all these results in uh, in either AWS Elastic, or you can use report portal to congregate all the results, right? To to basically get all the results for each one and then derive insights out of it, right? You can do either in the Elastic, the same thing, you can do it in report portal, or you can use any other third-party library for using congregating those results, right? And then creating insights out of those. Those from the reporting, custom reporting standpoint, right? So the first thing is that you need to store all the result outputs that you get, store it in a place, and get that data out of that in a reporting portal, and then basically create an insights or a trend line or your custom success failed criterias or time out of those messages, right? The other custom framework that you can write is the logging, right? Which is very important because custom loggers are very important in the sense what kind of logging you want in when you are trying to identify where the failures are, right? So let's say I'm doing a performance testing, right? I want to capture timing of each action item that I'm doing, right? So here custom logger will really help me to gain that kind of information. Is it clear?
Yes, thanks.
Any other question?
Yeah, one more question is like this is just a one some test cases, right? So in a test suite. But if we want to add more test suite, let's say after login, I want to view my account or my profile and change some information, something like this. There's a scenario like that. So how can I add test cases and how can I more code in a framework? So basically it's a enhancing of the framework, right?
That's not framework basically. That's your test frame.
Adding a code, right, for the
Right, right.
test case.
So you add code in. So if I go here, right? Let's say I'm clicking an element and I'm logging into the portal, right? And my first test ends here, right? My second test is that I'm inputting and clicking and doing a login, right? And I'm waiting for the logout link to be visible, right? So these are my two tests. I can divide them into two tests. So the code that I need to write is still be written in the keyword format, but either I can do it in the library. So if I go to this, I can write my custom code in the Python library and derive my keywords out of it, right? So this is verifying login. This is basically my custom code, right? Where I'm telling what to do, right? Not in the workflow fashion, but I am defining this verify login whole workflow in the code where I'm deriving the web driver class driver, right? And then I'm using that to input username field. Now I can just go here and write more code, right? On this and verifying login, I can say go to the next page and verify that my name is what it is, the same name with what I had logged in, right? And it's not on the main page, but it's on the next page, right? So I can continue writing that code from here, or I can create multiple keywords like this, right? So if I go here, I go to resource. So I can create multiple keywords here, right? So open browser to login page. Login page should be open. Go to login page. Input username, input password, submit credentials. Welcome page should be open. And then I created a valid login whole workflow, right? So what I do is I write custom keywords and then I use Selenium library as my first go-to code where if I am able to find anything, any keyword in the current Selenium robot library. If not, then I'll write my custom code to create a custom keyword, which is not existing in the Selenium keyword library, right? And then I can keep enhancing and creating those. So I can do it here. I can do it at a global level, which is my keyword dot robot. So I can, so this is one I created like start app. This is my custom keyword. And what it is doing is it's opening a browser and maximizing the window, right? So in that ways, I can keep writing code depending on the complexity of the code. The more complex it is, which cannot be handled by Selenium directly, then I have to go to the library and write my custom code, which can be this. And then if it is not a custom code, if I'm able to take advantage of the Selenium library to define the workflows, I can create multiple uh, keywords here, which basically wraps the action items on the Selenium library, right? which is much more easier to read. So login page should be open. This is much more easier to read, right? Rather than just saying title should be login page. So if I go, um, if I basically write this as a test, it's much more easier for me to say login page should be open is what I'm testing, right? So my workflow is keywords are defined from the business functionality or the workflow functionality standpoint, right? But my code beneath it, uh, it's defined in the technique from the technical aspect. So these are the technical keywords. This is the business keywords, right? Uh, so all the technical keywords come from Selenium library or your custom Python library, right? All the business is what you will create under resource so that it's much more easier. So now I need to add more code, right? So I need to say uh, login page should be open, but I want to check that instead of just title, I want to check if my location should be a welcome URL as well, right? So this way I can keep adding custom code. I can create new keywords to navigate to the next page, right? So I will say after login, uh, go to this URL, right? Or click on something, right? To go to the next page. So I can do that. But when you define it from the business functionality perspective, so it's much more easier to create those workflows for under the test case.
So it's, let's say I want to view my profile page. So it should come under the login page should be open.
So, so you want to go to your profile page, right? So your base is that you should be already logged in to it, right? So what you will do is once, let's say,
I think I need to create a new thing and then it say
yeah,
view profile something or.
user should be able to view. The first thing I will do is I will use this keyword, which says login valid, right? So that's the first thing that I need to do. Second thing is I'm uh, clicking on profile button. Now, once I click on profile button, something will happen, right? It will open my account summary page. Now I should say my title should be my name, right? So I created a new function saying user should be able to view profile. The first thing it will do is it will do a valid login, and then it will click on a button, which is your profile button, and then it will wait for the title to change to your name, right? So I did an action. I did a prerequisite, which is valid login. I did an action, clicking on the profile button, and I did an assertion, which is checking that title is my name. So I'm doing all three things that I need to do in a test: prerequisite, doing the action, and validating.
Yeah, and if we have a data in this scenario in this test case,
Mhm.
and where we can put that data in our
So
data
this
set.
is where you will put your data. You will put it in test data,
Mm-hmm. Just add it on here.
right? Keep adding it and use it from there,
Mm-hmm.
or you can put it here in the config, in the variables dot row. You can put your data here. So this is the data that I put. So let's say
First name or last name, whatever it is.
yeah, or yeah, let's say
Email maybe.
and then I can use this and So you create one place where you store all your data. You can have multiple places depending on what you do. Test data, I keep it separate just for test, and config for major things like the browser URL, username, passwords, and also the page elements depending on what page I am. So I want to keep that as main variables. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that clear?
Yes. So sorry, I asked lots of questions today.
Yeah. Ask.
Yeah,
Keep
yeah,
asking.
yeah. One more is like how. So we just keep adding our scenarios or test cases in the same file
Right.
because I can't see the file name here exactly.
No. Yeah, I don't write it in the same file. So if you look at the file structure here, I have invalid login as a separate file, test and test1 as a separate file, and valid login as a separate file. It's basically up to you. I don't want to create too much mess in a single file. Then it becomes really difficult to navigate and understand
Yeah.
what tests are there in that file, right?
So we can create view profile in our in test cases like project panel as well, right? Here, left hand side.
Yeah. Wherever you want. But
Mm.
the only thing that you need to remember is if you're creating keywords in under a test file, you can only use it in that test file.
Mhm.
If you're creating those keywords in under resources or your global configs, you have to import those files in order to use those keywords, right? So it's better to use resources because resources one thing that you will always remember to import, right? Now, if you create a keyword separately, let's say valid login in test one, you cannot use it in test until unless you import test one. And you don't import test pages, right? You import libraries, you import configs, you import resources.
Yeah, I think resource file approach is more flexible.
Right.
Yeah. And last question is how it is different from how this approach, whatever it is different from Selenium page object concept.
It's really not. It's up to you. If you want to run it as a page object or you want to run it as a functionality or a business workflow perspective, you can do that. It's up to you. You want to define it as page element, which you can do, but then I recommend or I prefer using uh, the business objects, right? Uh, and business functionality from that perspective. If it depends on your app as well, right? How many pages
Mm-hmm.
your app has.
Yeah.
If it has hundreds of pages, then it makes sense to have page objects.
Yeah.
If it is a single page application, then it really doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's it from my side. I think we are a little bit over time. That's okay.
Good session, Sumit. Thank you for joining team. Let's close the session. One request that I have from you all is we have the next session coming up from Sumit based on the Testoper project. I mean, testing project, right, Sumit? Yeah. And for those who do not know what is that, it is open source, that's used for various types of testing. And Sumit is planning to cover that for UI testing. The program has been in the Eventbrite. Please register it, and also please refer your friends to attend that program. I know that we kind of a little bit reduced in number of attendees because of still certain technical difficulties for this particular program, but let's work together to make our next program starting in next 3 weeks successful. That's the last program for the year, and let's get as many as attendees to attend the program and benefit from it. I kindly require your help, Kevin, and all the people here, Pankaj, Sarika, Vaishali, to forward it to all your contacts to register and benefit from this program. That's my kind request to you all. Wonderful, Sumit, top notch as usual, and all these programs are recorded and will be published in the YouTube, and people can always go back and review them. So with that, let's close the call, and I'll see you guys next week. And I understood from Sumit, next week would be our last session for this robot framework, and which is going to be focused on CI/CD. And after that, we will take 1 week break. Then the week after, the last program of this year from Testoper community, we will go through, that is Testoper, testing project program, and that we will learn the tools, how it has been used for testing. And with that, we'll close the year. Looking forward to all of you attending that last program and also supporting us throughout this year. And also advance thanks for supporting us next year for all the programs that we are planning to do for the next year. With that, let's close the call. You guys have a great evening and take care, and I'll talk to you all soon.
Yeah, I would like to thank Kader and Sumit specifically. I think Sumit is a teacher. His explanation is very good, and he goes into very detail. So
yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Codeathon is all about that, right? Code along kind of program, and the intention was that.
Yeah.
So now we as a team together have to help to promote this Testoper community, all the good work that we are trying to do to help the community. We need to promote that, and I count on every one of you to help us to make this successful moving forward. And next year, we're going to have awesome programs. We are already planning for it. And all the programs that we're going to do for the next year will be published, first week of December in the Eventbrite. And I will also request kind help from you guys to support and promote our next year programs. And for those who do not know, I just wanted to let you know that if you can see my screen, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so in the teams, you all have access to the teams. So if you go to the Codeathon channel, and if you go to the files, and then if you go to the certificates, you would actually see, if you are eligible based on our attendance criteria, 60% attendance criteria, your certificate will be inside these. So you can grab those certificates and also post that proudly in your LinkedIn post that you got that certificate by attending the Testoper programs. I would really appreciate a bit of marketing from you guys to promote Testoper by publishing yourself that you have been, attending the programs by putting these certificates in the LinkedIn profile. Okay. All good?
Yes, Kader.
Yeah, thanks, Kader.
Thank you.
You guys have a great evening. Good night, and talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.